Hello and welcome to ChatDPS. Robert and I are back for the next thrilling installment as we go through some of the news items that we just like to highlight for people's entertainment during the week as it pertains to data privacy. Last week we spoke about cars and particularly electric vehicles and how they're harvesting data. This week is kind of a little bit more interesting in terms of the fact that there's been a pretty big storm in a teacup over the fact that one of our large retailers, Bunnings, is basically playing with facial recognition. The media that's been around this has been quite controversial because, of course, the media play up to the extremes, and what we've seen are people wandering around Bunnings with guns and knives and all sorts of, sort of poor behaviour, poor social order, I guess, would be a good way of putting it. So I think Bunnings took the law into their own hands and started using some software packaging that could actually do recognition of facial features and what have you. I guess, Robert, it's kind of an interesting one, this, isn't it? Because, playing to the lowest common denominator and what have you. And, the people, sort of looking at the squeaky wheel, sort of like there's a problem. So therefore somebody does something quite extreme to combat it, or somebody's done something quite extreme. So something oppositely extreme has come into play. Is that how I'm reading it? Am I reading it correctly?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I think somebody within the security team within Bunnings had the bright idea that this piece of technology might help them reduce crime within their stores. I think the context and some of the background's quite interesting. Maybe we'll touch on some of that. So it was actually Choice that came across this, both with Bunnings and Kmart, who, of course, are both owned by Wesfarmers. So this was about 2.5 years ago that Choice discovered that both Kmart and Bunnings were using facial recognition technology without being open and transparent with their customers about the use of this particular technology. And a little bit like when we talk about those big data breaches of Medibank and how the 2-year anniversary has passed for those. Well, this was 2.5 years ago. And it's actually quite interesting to read the Privacy Commissioner's response and media statements around this particular decision, because she does say that she deliberately took quite a bit of time on this, because it does have repercussions for other organizations that either may be also using facial recognition technology or thinking about using it. So look, it took 2.5 years. We've talked about resourcing problems, but what the Commissioner, Carly Kine, did say was that she took her time. There was an extensive exchange between herself and the previous Privacy Commissioner and Bunnings. She said that Bunnings were quite cooperative, but here we are. They've been found to be in breach of a number of aspects of the Privacy Act, and essentially been told to stop doing what they were doing. So that's probably the most serious consequence, not to repeat what they were doing in the past, and we can kind of get into some of the details. And I think the other interesting thing was there's several. One is that Bunnings have appealed, and so they've taken this to the Administrative Review Tribunal. So the Commissioner's decision will be appealed. Yeah, they're going for it. So they're doubling down in terms of appealing the decision. And as you've sort of touched on, it's caused a bit of a storm in the media, and there's a number of news stories around this, and the narrative has been strongly driven by these images of alleged criminals or potential criminal activity. And you could really kind of see the Bunnings PR and the Wes Farmers PR machine clicking to overdrive, I think. And again, I won't go into conspiracies, but given that we're talking about one of the biggest organisations in Australia and one of the biggest advertisers in Australia, it's no surprise that you see a lot of the commercial channels come out really pushing this kind of criminal aspect narrative.
Yeah, but they're not the only ones, are they? I mean, this has been kicked around for a while now, and all of the airports, in Australia, threw out the idea of using facial recognition a few years ago, but I noticed that it's now back. They were talking about using smart gate technology, facial recognition. One can understand all of that sort of stuff, but I suppose they're going one step further now, and they're actually saying that they're going to use it for the 11 million international travelers every year on their general CCTV imaging, which is, is it different or is it the same? I mean, should it be treated differently or should it be treated the same? Public safety, or sort of just I'm looking after my staff and what have you. Are these the same things?
It's all about proportionality. So that was, I guess, one of the main themes of the Privacy Commissioner's declaration and decision making was the use of the technology must be in proportion to the potential interference with people's privacy. So when you look at the Bunnings issue, and I think from memory, like they had a database of, let's say, the usual suspects across the 63 or so stores across New South Wales and Victoria. And I think at its peak, this database had maybe sort of 480 something faces, images captured within its database. And if you weigh that against the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who enter Bunnings, what the Commissioner was saying that it wasn't in proportion. Using this technology was not in proportion in terms of the interference with privacy. Bunnings would say, but if you weren't on the database, if you weren't one of the usual suspects, then your image would be deleted in the blink of an eye. But that's not the point that the Commissioner was saying. Because they would say, if you just put a sign up outside Bunnings saying we are using CCTV rather than, say, facial recognition technology, that may be enough of a deterrent. So it's about proportionality. So if you then take the example of an airport, now you've got security, you've got real security risk where somebody could take something explosive, say, for example, onto an airplane, and you put at risk the lives of people. So while you can sort of say, somebody could come in with a gun or a knife or something into Bunnings, the Privacy Commissioner drew some distinction between what may be happening at an airport or a stadium, where the risk to safety is far greater than at a retailer. So the context is important, the facts are important, and how you go about rolling out this technology is important. So I mean, what the Commissioner said is that if they did this a different way, you could probably use it. So if you got informed consent, if you put signage up, if you're open and transparent about how you're actually collecting this information, then it might be okay in a retail situation. So context is important, transparency is important, getting consent is important, and really when you look at the facts as they're presented in this particular decision, Bunnings probably didn't, they weren't forthcoming in terms of their privacy policy. They came up with some standards, but this was like years after they kicked this off. So it would appear that they didn't think this through properly. They didn't implement this properly. I think that's quite key in terms of the outcome of what the Commissioner said.
In some respects, from where I'm sitting, I mean, obviously making the political point around the fact it's some kind of an authoritarian / dystopian future, where people are saying, but if you're doing nothing wrong, then everything's okay, That's not what I'm hearing from you, though. I mean, I'm hearing there were 480 people that were, supposedly the usual suspects. The Kaiser Soze is amongst us. And, what we're beginning to realize is that, they were actually really zoning in on them. Is it right to be able to sort of say, well, look, these guys have got the right to understand that, look, these are the guys that are actually creating problems. They're known criminals. Should they actually just be left to the police to manage? Or are they actually quite genuinely, sort of like, I suppose, fearful for the security and safety of their staff.
Well, that's certainly what they're saying was the intention. And in terms of responding, if they had a match, I think there was various options that that security staff could then take, and they might just speak to the local store manager. I think they suggested there might be some covert security officers within Bunnings who would then approach that person, ask them to leave. And I think one of the options was to involve the police, and they could have gone straight to that option. So look, it's very much put forward as a security measure. But of course, I mean, what's interesting is if you're collecting data from hundreds of thousands of people, even if you're deleting the personal and sensitive information, you're still capturing unique identifiers. So again, who knows how that data might be used? You know, Bunnings are saying it's for security purposes, but once you're capturing unique identifiers about how people are entering your store, what time they're entering the store, whereabouts they're moving in the store, then it opens up, you know, other possibilities. So you might start off saying, well, we're collecting this information for security reasons, and then maybe a year later you might say we're collecting this information for other reasons. But there is that potential for the slippery slope. And again, it's all about, I think it comes down to context, and it comes down to openness and transparency about how you're collecting and using that information.
Yeah, and I think it's also probably right and proper that we should actually look at the facts here in terms of, you know, sort of like CCTV. You need to have a CCTV system in order to be able to have a facial recognition function. Yeah, so it's a platform that sits on, you know, as an aside to the CCTV thing. So just having a CCTV thing may be a little bit different to having facial recognition arrangements.
Yeah,
probably a good point to make in terms of how that's going.
Yeah. So essentially,
it's a really interesting one. Sorry, Robert.
No, I was going to say, I mean, basically they were taking the images from CCTV and then putting it through this particular platform, and then it was going through a number of steps to actually figure out, okay, am I seeing an image? And once they just determine the image, does that match somebody on the database? So yeah, so that's how it was working.
Yeah, very, very different to just, you know, CCTV, I can do that. We've been seeing things like vehicle registration number plates being, you know, recognized for years on forecourts and what have you. And this is just, I think, an extension of where that is. And, you know, like I say, I mean, maybe if they'd gone about it a little bit differently, then there would be, there would be, you know, a sign up outside saying, you know, we're using this for this, you know, this particular purpose. It's a condition of your entry or something, you know.
Yeah, that's right. So but you may have needed to go a step further. So there's guidance on the Office of the Information Commissioner's website. So again, it's like, is that the right technology? And do you need to go out and get active consent from each of your customers before they enter the store? Is signage enough? Possibly not. Particularly when you're collecting sensitive information. So it's not just personal information, but because they're putting you up against the usual suspects and potentially, suggesting you might be, potential criminal. This is a collection of sensitive information. It's got a higher bar. Again, it's all about context. And so therefore, you may need to be a little bit more active in terms of getting people's consent rather than just putting signage up.
Perfect. Okay, Robert. Well, I think that's, it's an interesting one. I don't think it's going to go away quickly, this one. I think there's going to be a little bit more. It's one of those ethical conundrums, I think, that we're sort of like working with here. And it's not easy stuff, right? I mean, it's, quite clearly the commissioners actually thought long and hard about this. And, these people are trained, they know what they're looking at. I mean, it's not something that's just, people need to be, more careful and all the rest of it. It's a question of, there's some considerations here. And they're ethical ones, right? Moral ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
Robert, thank you very much again. One exciting episode of ChatDPS. Quick, short, punchy. Thanks very much indeed. It's great to speak with you, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks.